U.S. military drones have begun prowling the seas. In early September, they identified their target, a 12-meter wooden boat drifting through the Caribbean. Vessels like these are common in the region, used daily by fishermen and just as often by smugglers. Under normal circumstances, U.S. forces would intercept the boat, board it, and conduct a search. This time was different. The drone destroyed it outright. Over the following 2 weeks, the same scene played out again and again, with boat after boat obliterated at sea. Donald Trump later announced that those aboard were cartel operatives and that the strikes were part of a new campaign to stop the drug trade before it reached American shores. He issued a blunt warning to smugglers, declaring that anyone trafficking poisonous drugs into the United States would be wiped out. By the end of the month, the U.S. had launched at least 14 strikes against suspected drug vessels. But there was a problem. These strikes were happening in the wrong region. Most cocaine production originates in Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and Mexico, and shipments typically move overland or across the Pacific, not through the Caribbean. Then, in October, the real objective became clearer. Trump shifted focus toward the Caribbean theater, implicitly setting his sights on Venezuela. The U.S. dispatched its most advanced aircraft carrier, authorized CIA activity within Venezuela's borders, and signaled that strikes on land could be next. The drones that once hunted smugglers had now locked on to a larger target, one flying the Venezuelan flag. Venezuela holds the world's largest oil reserves, a fortune that has brought more hardship than prosperity. For decades, its leadership has traded oil for protection, first turning to Moscow, then to Beijing. Russian bombers have landed on Venezuelan runways, while Chinese loans have underwritten infrastructure projects. But the walls are closing in. Sanctions have hollowed out the economy, allies are keeping their distance, and Trump's pressure campaign has boxed President Maduro into a corner. Caracas attempted to negotiate. Maduro even offered U.S. companies a majority stake in Venezuela's oil industry, a desperate concession that Washington rejected outright. This was never just about oil or cocaine. It was about power. The Trump administration had accepted the reality of a multipolar world, but the Western Hemisphere was different. Under the Monroe Doctrine, South America was meant to remain America's domain, not a playground for Russian weapons or Chinese capital. Venezuela became the example, proof of what happens when a government in Washington's backyard grows too close to Moscow or Beijing. By mid-October, diplomatic backchannels collapsed and tensions quietly escalated. The U.S. reshuffled its military leadership, with the head of Southern Command stepping down years ahead of schedule, a sign that Washington wanted more aggressive leadership. Soon after came the buildup. Over 10,000 Marines and sailors deployed across the Caribbean, backed by naval and air assets, all officially labeled as anti-cartel operations. At the same time, activity beneath the surface intensified. Trump authorized covert operations inside Venezuela. Shortly after, Caracas claimed it had captured CIA-backed agents plotting a false flag attack, allegedly a plan to strike a U.S. warship and blame Maduro, creating justification for a full-scale assault. A second covert effort followed. According to reports, the FBI attempted to bribe Maduro's personal pilot, offering a $50 million bounty to divert the plane's mid-flight so U.S. authorities could seize him. It sounded like a Cold War spy thriller and the kind of tactic once used to capture cartel kingpins in Mexico. This time, it failed. The pilot refused and the plan collapsed. But failure often leads to escalation. If Phase 1 unfolded in the shadows, Phase 2 may not. The U.S. has now assembled its largest naval force in the Caribbean since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Nearly a tenth of the Navy sits off Venezuela's coast, including the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, capable of deploying more than 75 warplanes. Washington is also reviving Cold War infrastructure. Old naval and air bases are being rebuilt, while civilian airports in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands are undergoing upgrades. Both lie roughly 800 kilometers from Venezuela and could serve as launch points for mainland operations. Satellite imagery shows Reaper drones positioned on Puerto Rican runways, with new aircraft shelters expanding capacity. Open-source intelligence also points to refurbished taxiways at former military bases, allowing U.S. aircraft to stage, refuel, and maintain continuous sorties. Officials argue these assets support anti-cartel missions, but the presence of F-35s and B-52s suggests otherwise. That level of firepower isn't meant for chasing smugglers, it's meant for regime change. On paper, Venezuela's military appears formidable, but the reality is different. Years of corruption have hollowed it out, turning it into a political prop rather than a fighting force. The Air Force operates Russian-made Su-30s and aging F-16s, many of which are grounded, stripped for parts, or barely functional. Maintenance is poor, supply lines are thin, and what looks impressive in parades would collapse in a real fight. Russia has offered symbolic support. Cargo planes have landed in Caracas, advisors have appeared, and there are quiet reports of Wagner fighters entering the country. For Russia, Venezuela is leverage, a way to pressure Washington over Ukraine. But Russia's resources are stretched thin, and whatever assistance it provides won't change the outcome. A U.S. carrier strike group could neutralize Venezuela's defenses in days, if not hours. Still, Washington likely won't rush into occupation. The strategy is slower, quieter. Strike airstrips, dismantle smuggling routes, apply pressure, and let special forces and drones do the rest. Each strike would bleed the Maduro government without ever officially calling it a war. The real question isn't how such a conflict would begin, it's what comes after. Toppling Maduro may be the easy part. Filling the vacuum is far harder. Years ago, Chavez flooded the country with weapons, importing AK-47s and later building a factory to produce more. Estimates suggest up to 500,000 rifles are now in the hands of gangs and militias loyal to the regime. If the government collapses, those weapons won't disappear, they'll simply change hands. Rival factions would tear into one another to claim what remains, triggering a brutal power struggle driven by unintended consequences. Power, after all, doesn't make one wiser, it just makes them louder.